When we think of aircraft carriers today, we picture giants like the USS Nimitz or HMS Queen Elizabeth, floating fortresses bristling with fighters. But every revolution has a beginning. Long before supersonic jets and nuclear-powered vessels, there was a quiet trailblazer, HMS Argus. Launched in the final months of World War I, she didn't fire a single shot in combat, but she changed naval warfare forever. The origins of HMS Argus are unconventional. She began life not as a warship, but as a passenger ocean liner. Ordered by Italy's Lloyd Sabato line and named Conte Rosso, she was intended to transport civilians across the Atlantic in luxury. But war has a way of altering plans. In 1916, with the war dragging on and naval aviation becoming increasingly important, the British Admiralty saw potential in the incomplete hull. They purchased the ship and made a bold decision to convert her into a new kind of warship, one capable of launching and recovering aircraft at sea. Naval aviation was still in its infancy. Airships and seaplanes had been used for reconnaissance, but landing and taking off from ships was still a dangerous and untested idea. The Royal Navy had already experimented with launching planes from short platforms on battleships and cruisers, but these were limited and lacked any means for recovery. Argus would be different. What set Argus apart was her radical design. Engineers stripped away the ship's superstructure and funnels, creating a completely flat, unobstructed flight deck, stretching the full 168 meters from bow to stern. This might seem obvious today, but at the time, it was revolutionary. Previous attempts at aircraft carriers had separate decks for takeoff and landing, with the superstructure dividing the two. This made landing incredibly difficult and dangerous. Argus's full-length flight deck allowed both takeoffs and landings to happen in sequence, and laid the foundation for the modern aircraft carrier. Below the deck, aircraft were stored in hangars raised to the surface by hydraulic elevators, another innovation that would become standard on all future carriers. HMS Argus was officially commissioned in September 1918, just 2 months before the end of World War I. As a result, she never saw frontline combat during the war. But that didn't make her any less important. She was used extensively for testing and developing carrier flight operations, which were still a risky and unpredictable business. Early aircraft like the Sopwith Camel and Sopwith Strutter were delicate biplanes, designed more for dogfights over the trenches than deck landings at sea. Pilots had to land without the benefit of modern arrestor wires or angled flight decks. In fact, some early tests involved pilots deliberately crashing into safety nets or using sandbags to absorb impact on landing. It was chaotic, but it was progress. Argus also carried a small air wing, usually around 15 to 20 aircraft. These planes were launched using their own engine power from the flat deck, and landing required precision, skill, and nerves of steel. Following the war, Argus took on a new mission: to become the Royal Navy's floating aviation laboratory. She was instrumental in developing the doctrine, technology, and training that would define carrier warfare for decades. She served as a training platform for naval aviators, giving pilots a chance to practice deck landings, takeoffs, and formation flying at sea. This wasn't just about the pilots. It was about the crews, too. Deck handlers, signal officers, engineers, all learning how to run a carrier like a complex machine. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, Argus participated in fleet exercises, collaborated with other carriers like HMS Furious and HMS Eagle, and played a pivotal role in advancing carrier design. By the time World War II began in 1939, HMS Argus was showing her age. Her speed, armor, and capacity were no match for the new generation of carriers. But the Royal Navy still found a valuable role for her. During the early years of the war, Argus served as an aircraft transport and training carrier. She helped ferry planes across the Atlantic to reinforce British forces in North Africa and the Mediterranean. She also supported pilot training, launching deck qualification programs that allowed new aviators to gain essential flight hours before joining frontline carriers. Despite her outdated status, Argus remained active until 1944, when she was finally retired and scrapped in 1946. HMS Argus may not have engaged in dramatic battles or headline-grabbing missions, but her impact was no less profound. She proved that aircraft could be launched and recovered safely at sea, and she showed how a flat flight deck could transform naval strategy. Every aircraft carrier that came after her, the British, American, Japanese, or otherwise, owes a debt to Argus. Her innovations made naval aviation practical, scalable, and dominant. She was the prototype of the future, a quiet giant whose influence can still be seen on every modern aircraft carrier today. She wasn't built for war, but she helped shape how wars would be fought. She bridged the gap between fragile wooden biplanes and the steel giants of modern naval aviation. If you enjoyed this dive into naval aviation history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.